And there we are. I'm with the world famous Clyde Johnston, the golf architect extraordinaire. So Clyde, thank you for coming on. We have a lot of fun talking all things golf course architecture today. And it's a very, very fascinating field that I'm very excited to learn more about, and hopefully everybody listening will as well.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. So good to be here.
As we were talking just a minute ago, I asked you your current projects. You're doing some work at the Robert Trent Jones Golf Trail over in Alabama.
Yes. Yeah. Just we're currently working on the Ross Bridge course with a pretty decent size renovation that should be finished here in a couple of months. And also did a bunker renovation on their Capitol Hill facility on the Judge course this year. So both of those have been ongoing for the last 8 months.
When somebody calls you up and says, we know who you are, we've seen some of your work, we want to do a renovation of our club, that it's whether it's 20 years old, 50 or 100 years old, which we've got courses like that now, given how long golf's been in the country, and even some that are older than that. What can you just start there and take us through kind of that early conversation of getting an idea what they want and maybe feeling them out, and then what's going through your mind?
Sure, it's pretty much the same for renovations as it is for new golf courses, but you pretty much want to find out what does the owner want for the project, what are their current needs, what type of people are playing the facility, what type of facility is it, because that makes a difference as well. But really, you find out generally what the client wants to do, whether it's just a total redesign or whether it's just a cosmetic uh, uh, update to get it more into in a competitive state for courses that are in that area, and you take it from there. It's after that, it's really site evaluation, looking at all the features of the golf course, the bunkers, the tees, the greens, the trees, drainage in particular is extremely important. Talking with the superintendent is also a huge factor because generally he's got a good idea of what needs to be done in the first place.
What would be some of the main you said drainage is obviously a big one, is that those things age over time and I'm sure get clogged like other things do. I'm sure many people can relate to clogging household plumbing and things like that, drains in the tub and the commode. But outside of that, is there or tree growth, which you touched on, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little deeper. But when someone comes to you and says, um, our course has been modified over time, maybe by past board members or input from various people in the club, and it does a lot of it revolve around, well, we want to take it back to what it was originally, because even places like Augusta National, when they called Byron Nelson, said, can you help us on getting the greens back to their original shape and shot patterns into the greens, or is it something else? Is it just the members want to change the design of a course, or is it usually to go back to original?
Well, a lot of the more historic courses do want to go back to some of the older features that were probably eliminated over time. But other courses, they're looking really to be competitive in their marketplace, and they want to be as in good a shape as they can be. And a lot of that has to do with, um, replacing. Bunkers, for example, they only last 8 to 12 years, depending on how much they're used. So you really, after that period of time, you really need to rebuild them. Greens are 25 to 30. There again, depending on how well they're maintained. Everything on the golf course is just like your car. Everything's got a life to it, and some have a longer lifespan. And it all depends too on how well they're maintained. But at the end of the day, things have to be repaired or replaced. Irrigation systems, grasses, especially here in the South, these ultra dwarf grasses and the old tiff dwarf that we used to use, they're basically natural mutations, and they continue to mutate over time, so they have to be replaced with fresher stock to have a better putting surface. So it's really just trying to keep the golf course updated so that it functions well, can be maintained well.
Is there, I mean, I know there's reasons, but can you touch on, or is that getting into the agronomy too much, that the need or the desire to go from, let's say, a native Bermuda grass that might not need as much attention or replacement over time if it is that particular strand is native to a certain area or state, and then all the Tiff Eagle, the Tiff Dwarf, and all the ones that you mentioned. What is the benefit to the newer hybrids compared to what would just be native type of turf?
Well, the new ultra dwarf Bermudas such as Tiff Eagle, Champion, Mini Verde, and there's probably half dozen more in various parts of the countries. They have a more upright, tighter leaf pattern to them, and so they can be mowed lower, which allows the green speeds to get a little faster. And of course, when that happens, we have to make sure when we rebuild the greens that we have to kind of calm down some of the slopes so that they don't come too fast. That was actually one of the big problems when Tiff Eagle first came out, was people just regrassed their greens and they didn't think about the slopes. And next thing you know, they're out there with green speeds of 14 to 15 and just not playable for the average golfer. So you have to think about those things. But the grass people, they are constantly experimenting with newer varieties, trying to breed into them more beneficial characteristics. Drought tolerance is one. Shade tolerance is a huge one that they're really trying to develop with, especially putting green grasses, because basically the shorter you mow a grass, the more sunlight hours it has to have during the day. So a green needs a good 8-10 hours during the summertime, but that rough grass that's mowed at 1.5 inches, it can get by with 4 or 5. So that's just part of the puzzle.
And I'm assuming that you have to take that into account when you're designing a new course, is how many trees you're going to have around the green versus how many you're going to have lining the fairway. Evidently, with the new strands and the hybrid grasses that'll need more sunlight because they're going to be mowed shorter, you're going to have less trees surrounding greens or protecting greens so that they don't get the shade during the day when they're requiring a lot more grass, which the changes in architecture, is that one of the biggest changes that you've seen in your career?
Oh yeah, it's nowadays on a renovation job or a new job, either one, I do sunlight studies to make sure we're taking out the right trees to get the proper amount of sunlight on all the playing surfaces, and that's a big factor. Holes that play directly north-south or south-north, those are the ones that are the worst because they have trees on the east side where the sun rises and obviously trees on the west where the sun sets. So those are the most challenging. So whenever I'm doing a new golf course routing plan, I'm trying to take that into consideration so that I don't have to deal with that. And really, it's not a hard solution. Just take out more trees. Just make sure you can get enough sunlight in there to grow good grass.
That's spoken pretty confidently coming from someone who lives in Beaufort County, where you needed basically a papal bull to take out any type of tree around here for a long time.
Exactly.
When you work with an older course and a membership comes to you and says, we want to get this back to what it was when Donald Ross designed it, or when I don't know, pick anyone, A.W. Tillinghast, or even Arthur Mr. Dr. Mackenzie designed it. Mm-hmm. Do you get into telling them, and especially in today's world of so much things being green, when you tell them, hey, you've got to remove X amount of trees, which could be up to 50% of the trees on the property. But if we use Oakmont as a rather drastic example, when they went through and they had that tree elimination, because they had the tree, what was it, back in the 70s, I think it was, they had the green initiative where they planted all the trees, and then they have to go and they have to take them all out. That didn't go very well. I'm sure there was a lot of discussion, maybe very fierce debate about that. But when you go into somewhere and you tell them, hey, your nature curtain or your tree growth is just, it's been for too long and out of control, and if you spend this money to do the work that I want to, you're going to spend a lot more in less time redoing it because you have far too much tree growth, and a lot of this has to be removed. Do you get much kickback?
You get some,
courses
especially,
and communities?
Yeah, you do. You get some, not necessarily from the membership per se, except for significant trees that are a factor in how a golf hole is played. But governing agencies, yeah, there's generally a lot of kickback from that. But at the end of the day, if you prove to them that it's necessary for sunlight getting to the primary playing surfaces, it's usually a pretty easy sell. And over time, I've developed charts to where I look at the sun angles from a lot of different positions around the green, and I can show them from any spot on the green how many hours of sunlight that spot's going to get. So it's pretty easy to prove scientifically that X number of trees or that tree or this tree needs to come out. And so they can't argue with the science behind it. And so it becomes easier, but they still don't like it.
That whole the thing with trees that I find amazing, and I from what little I know about it was what I learned when they had to replace the tree at 18 at Pebble Beach. And talking to Tim Morgan, who's here locally now full time, talked to him about it some because I think he had some input, or the USGA at that time had input. But I had never known until he got to explaining it to me that if you're going to replace a tree, whether it comes from a tree farm that has grown to a certain size, but that is a science unto itself, and that they have to be placed to the arcs and the minutes and the seconds and the degrees and everything else exactly the same that they grew in, or else that tree's never going to make it. That to me is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's the trees. They don't like to be turned around in a different angle and get part of the trees getting sunlight that it didn't used to. I mean, a lot of people used to take trees just out of the forest and go out and plant them in open land. Well, they would get sunburned. It would impact the bark of the tree, and it would ultimately kill the tree. So it is a very important factor.
Do you, when you do something, whether you're designing a new course or you're doing a remodel, or somebody calls you in, do you have employees that work for you? Do you have certain contractors and people that you've worked with over the years that you have a lot of faith and trust in their opinion that you call on? Or
I do. I don't currently have any employees right now because the workload is a lot less, and I decided to scale back 20 years ago. I was running around really just trying to keep people in my office busy, and I decided, well, that's not the fun part. That's not why I got into this business. I got into the business to design golf courses, not get business. And so I scaled down the office, and I've worked by myself now since 2003, and I enjoy it thoroughly. But what I do have is I have a list of very competent golf course contractors that uh, uh, that I use on, well, at least that's who I bid them out to. Sometimes the owner might have somebody else they want to bid the job to, but like I said, I've got about 6 that I've worked, and they've done multiple courses for me over time, and they're good contractors, very conscientious, and they have good shapers, which is very important with golf course design. So, basically in my contract for the design work, I have a clause in there that states that I get to pick the qualified contractors who will bid the work and ultimately do the work. So that's how I keep quality control.
You have done 2 of my favorite courses around here. Obviously at Old South, they've been very nice enough to allow me to come out there and teach and coach and do my thing for hardly 17 years now. But you designed that course going back, if I'm not mistaken, they opened in 89, 90, right around there.
I think it was 90 or 91.
Maybe, yeah, right. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that piece of property, that one and the other one that you did the remodel on, or they called you, was Paris Island, the Legends of Paris Island. I mean, when you look at 2 pieces of property like that are just absolutely unbelievable, when you stand on some of those holes and you look at what's around you, what goes through your mind as far as, is there anything that says, the big man upstairs made this unbelievable piece of property, and I got to be very careful not to mess it up? I relate it to a beautiful model, and she goes to a doctor for a nose job or some type of facial surgery. It's like, you were touched by the hands of the big man upstairs. You were touched by God. There's no one that's going to improve on that. But when you're taking those properties that are beautiful and they're out on the water and they're absolutely amazing, how do you go about incorporating what you want to do with what's already there?
Well, pretty much you do a thorough site investigation. You take a inventory of all the really good things, the aesthetic things, the trees, the views, and you just try to put it into some kind of a design program where okay, I want to save that nice oak tree on number 10. Uh, it's going to be form the dog leg, the golf hole, and that's how I'm going to use that asset, et cetera, et cetera. You brought up Old South. We did 13 different golf course routing plans for that golf course, looking at different clubhouse sites, different view opportunities, different trees that we might can use in the design. So sometimes there's a lot of effort that goes until you get to a point where you say, okay, this is the right plan.
Yeah, 'cause they've got a lot of old oak trees. I mean, the right side of number one that not a lot of people notice because the backdrop, there's a lot of trees between number one and number six. But then you get to number 10, it's got the big tree guarding the green right in the middle of the fairway. And knock on wood, how that thing has not ever been hit by lightning and has stayed in place for as long as it has, being the lone tree out there as big as it is amazing into itself.
Yeah.
And then you've got the angel oak out on 16 to the right side, which is one of the most beautiful, majestic trees in the whole area. And then a couple of the big oaks down 18. But when you look at a topographical map of a property, how do you determine where you're going to start laying things out? And in the case, we'll use Old South because a lot of people listening obviously are going to know that golf course.
Well, Old South really came down to where we could put the clubhouse because that entrance road from 278 in was nothing more than a dirt road back when we started that project. And so Old South basically brought the road down and the utilities down to the clubhouse location. I actually wanted the clubhouse to be over at the landing area of number 18, the first landing area up on that hill, and then have the two finishing holes coming from different directions to play into there. The clubhouse would have overlooked 9 and 18 green and the salt marsh. But
wow, that'd have been pretty.
yeah, it would have been, but that was another $500,000 or more to get road and utilities down to that point. So we didn't have the budget for that. So that's why we ended up with clubhouse where we did. It still worked out fine. We still have two very good finishing holes. We still take advantage of all the nice live oak trees and the views along 7, 8, 9, 16, 17, 18. So it still turned out really well.
Yeah, when people ask me, I said, look, I'm obviously biased because I've been out there for quite some time, and before I worked there, my brother worked there, so we've been at that golf course bugging the hell out of everybody out there for 24 years, almost a quarter of a century. But it's, I mean, and Scotty and the whole crew out there have done an amazing job, and that they don't grow the rough too thick. It's just up enough to make you think twice about what you're going to do. But as far as the routing, I tell everybody, look, you usually have 3 holes on each side that are challenging, meaning directional control, or they're in the woods in some way, shape, or form. You've got 3 holes that are relatively open, and then both nines, the last 3 holes of both nines go out to the marsh. So it's like you check all the boxes for everything that somebody wants to see when they come to the area, and it's one of the reasons that they have done so well for so long. I mean, it has become one of the golf courses, I think, on most people's list when they're coming to Hilton Head. Obviously, Harbor Town, or something in Sea Pines, something in Palmetto Dunes because they want to go see the ocean, and then Old South, Hilton Head National are usually on that list, especially when they come to Bluffton. And back when it opened, there was nothing in Bluffton. There's Moss Creek across the street, but that's a private development.
Right.
So to bring people over the bridge going back then, not a lot of people would remember that or even know about it. That was quite a monumental task, and that you had to do something well, or it wasn't going to appeal to people to say, I'm not going to drive off the bridge way down. There was no Cross Island Expressway. You had to go through Business 278, so it was a 20, 30-minute ride from Sea Pines. But yeah, I think again, it's one of my favorite pieces of property. It's one of my favorite golf courses around.
Yeah, we all remember how much of a pain in the rear it was to drive out to the DMV.
Yes.
So, but yeah, we were, Old South was blessed with, it was a great piece of land. I mean, it was good soil, great trees, great views. Wadsworth Golf Construction built the golf course. They're one of the best contractors in the country. I even had a good client, David Staley, Tom Jacoby, a group of good investors. They were all very supportive, and we got the golf course built on time. We had a good grow in, and the staff at Old South is phenomenal, from the pro shop staff to the outside staff to the golf course maintenance people in particular. They do a great job, and people just love it there. And I'm just really proud of the place.
Were there any other thing you mentioned the clubhouse, and that would have been, you're right, they have a good clubhouse now, but that if they had the same view of that back pond, but it was overlooking the marsh, that would be great. But was there any other changes that people who might be listening and played there a number of times might recognize relatively easily?
Well, we looked at several different routings, particularly holes 6, 7, and 8. I thought about putting a par 5 out there where we would have multiple marsh carries, and the green, number 8 green, would have ended up being a par 5 green. But we backed off of that because we just felt it was starting to get a little bit too hard for some people who, with the lower swing speeds, they can't hit the ball that far over those salt marsh areas. And so we went back to something that was a little more palatable in terms of the design. But like I said, it was just a great piece of land with great trees and great views, and and the rest is history now.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked that is in the late '90s, I worked out at Old Tabby Links in Spring Island, and I'd worked there for about 3 or 4 years, and obviously Ed C. and Arnold Palmer's group had designed that golf course. And what I didn't know until later on was that originally the Crenshaw Corps had designed the golf course for Spring Island, and it was on the other side of the island. And the only reason I knew it, because one of the members still had the 18th hole flag was in his backyard. He had never taken it out.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "What do you mean you have a flag?" And he said, "You didn't know that the course was supposed to be over here?" So the story was that the Crenshaw Corps group was obviously contacted first, because I don't think Chafin, Light and Associates was the developer, Jim Chafin and Jim Light. And I don't know if they had reached out to the Palmer group or didn't know if they could get to that level at that time, or whatever the reason. I don't know if I was ever told that, but they had Crenshaw Corps were hired. And then somehow the Palmer group got back to them and said, we'd be happy to do it. Now, this is going early 90, because they opened in 92, if I'm not mistaken, right around there, because Billy Sampson went out there as an assistant. And Palmer group came back and said, well, yeah, we can do it for you. And so the developers had to go back to the Crenshaw Corps group and say, Mr. Palmer has agreed to do this. Would you mind releasing us? But we promise the next course that we do, we will be sure to use your group. And then, of course, they did Chechessie Creek later on. But that member, he and his wife have since passed, but he had the 18th green or the 18th flagstick had been in his yard from the time he bought his house, and he never took it out.
Wow, that's a great story. I've never heard that before. But that's a terrific
not many people
piece of
have.
land. Yeah, that's a terrific piece of land. They did a great job with the design. I love playing that golf course.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think they got the island for $1 million, and they put $1 million in infrastructure. Or the bridge was $1 million and $1 million in infrastructure, and then it slowly built up from there. But yeah, it's a very special place.
Sure is.
Paris Island, when you got the call to go out there, another unbelievable piece of property. Every time I take people out there, they go, could you imagine what this land is worth if a real estate developer could come in here and get this? So arguably two of the best pieces of property in Beaufort County you have put your hands on. When you got called in for that, because it was a number of years, a couple decades, if I'm not mistaken, after you had done Old South. So how had your views or philosophy or anything had changed, especially you're working now again with another property that's all along the marsh and gorgeous views and everything else, but now you're not designing, you're actually redesigning. How did things change, and what was your approach on that?
Well, there again, it was a terrific piece of land. I started out just doing a little consulting work for them, and I just got to know everybody over there. And then the base commander, Colonel Crum, he decided one day that he thought that there was an opportunity to have a Hilton Head level golf course at Paris Island, and so he was really the strong point behind getting that movement started. And And the next thing I know, I'm out there and we're looking at all the things that we have to do. And people may not know, but archaeology is a huge factor on that Marine base.
Hmm.
And we ran into it because the golf course was right next to St. Helena, the site, Spanish settlement. We didn't we couldn't use the three finishing holes they had, 7, 8, 9, because of the archaeology value. We were able to put the practice range there, but we had to fill it to where the irrigation system would not disturb the existing soil where the artifacts might be. Um, but there again, that was a terrific piece of land, great views, great trees, just an awesome opportunity to let nature blend in with golf for the benefit of everyday golfers. We used some of the golf holes out there. We created some new ones, changed things around. So it all worked out really well. But gosh, we had an irrigation line that went from the practice range tee across the road to the 10th tee. And the archaeologists told us we couldn't dig it with the trencher. They insisted that they had to dig it by hand. And it took them
Hmm.
about a month or a half or something like that. So they dug that irrigation trench with little spoons and shovels and brushes and stuff just to be able
I
to
had
recover the artifacts that were in the dirt.
I had never played there on the original. Now the guys out there told me that right behind between the clubhouse and the driving range was the old, and I can't remember what hole it was. What they believe was a par 3 or 4 short one that went out towards the water.
Mm-hmm. Number 7.
And yeah, and then did 8 and 9 go somewhere around the range or through the range or
Yeah, it basically was around the perimeter of what the range is now. Number 9 came back kind of on the left side of the range as you're standing on the tee. But
are
it
any
was
remnants of that hole still there, or has it
probably,
just been?
probably if you, but that golf course was a pretty basic uh, uh, golf course. There was no, I mean, round greens, very flattish tees. There was really no architectural interest in it whatsoever. It was just,
Lacking character?
yeah, it didn't have any character. It was just a place to go hit golf balls around 18 holes. That's all it was. I mean, so it was a huge change for the base. And of course, now it's one of the top 10 military courses in the world. So,
What courses? I mean, what holes did you add out there? What was created to
oh
make up for
wow,
those three?
seems like to me we added number 3 and 4 were new holes. A lot of changes up around 12, 13, 14, and 15. Um, blending parts of certain holes. I don't know. I'd really have to. It's been so long. I'd have to go back
Not
and
debating it.
overlay the new design on top of the old design just to kind of see to remember what we did. But it was a lot of fun.
No, I don't want to pigeonhole anyone that's listening and thinking of hiring an architect and saying, well, Clyde only does things in the Hilton Head, Bluffton, Beaufort area. You do work everywhere. Okay.
Mostly the southeastern United States, but I've worked in 9 of the southern states, and I have a golf course in England as well. So I mean, in my younger days, I'd go anywhere, but now that
Mhm.
I'm older, traveling is a little tougher, so I try to stay closer to home.
Where at in England do you have
Uh,
your
it's not,
fingerprints?
yeah, it's not too far from Nottingham. It's actually in a little town called, they call it Southwell. We would call it Southwell, but it's called Nottingham Park. Excuse me, Norwood Park, and that was a fun project too because I went over. We built. There's 3 nines, the full 18, and then a 9-hole par 3. But we built them at different times, so I got to go back over a 20-year period, um, and it's just a historic uh, piece of land that dates back to the 13th century.
Hmm.
Some fairly famous people owned it at different times. Uh, Part of the golf course was in what they call an Episcopal park. It was 100 acres of land that one of the original landowners dug a moat around, a body of water, a moat, basically to keep poachers out and to keep game animals inside the 100 acres for their own benefit. And inside that 100 acres, I got to put 3.5 golf holes, but the permitting agency would not let us put any bunkers inside the 100 acres. We had to rely entirely upon the English oaks and um, native grasses and such for the character.
Why? What was the reasoning behind no bunkers? Like they're going to let you build 3 golf holes, but no bunkers. So you can't
You
put a
know,
hole in the ground with sand in it.
true. No, they just felt it would be out of character for the historic value of that part of the land.
Hmm. The differences in working there versus, because that's obviously it's a different hemisphere, it's a different climate. What were some of the were there challenges for you going from primarily southeastern United States up to the UK? Now you're dealing with different drainage, different weather, different grass, different everything.
Yeah, it was a lot of things were different, and it really started that we were designing in meters instead of feet. So that was a big brain teaser for me for a while until I got used to it. But everything was pretty similar. The owner didn't know much about golf, so it was pretty easy to convince his family that here's the right way to build things. So we built the greens to the USGA putting green specification, and drainage was a big factor. It was prior to my getting there, they had been growing pear trees, apple trees, wheat, strawberries, and raspberries. And so it was pretty much an agricultural thing, but it had some really terrific large trees throughout the property that we were able to utilize. But it was quite good land, slightly on the clay side. So that was a little bit of a challenge to work with. But other than taking a long time to get each 9 permitted, it went well. We had a terrific time. The owner's very pleased.
It sounds like a smaller, given the fact that it was privately owned and it had been used for growing agriculture, a smaller version of Augusta National. I've got a couple books on Augusta. One of them I found in a Salvation Army shop up in Charlotte when I was playing a tournament up there one time. I played early in the morning. I had the whole afternoon to burn. I just walking around malls and let's go see what's in here. And the book said Augusta National that had coffee ring stains on it and all this stuff. I started reading this book. I'm like, my God, I got to buy this thing. This thing might have been worth a lot of money at one time, but I mean, the whole history of the property, it was amazing.
Yeah, that's Augusta's got a lot of history behind it.
But it's got to be a treat to go see a property like that, and you got to get excited. I would have to imagine that you're overlooking this acreage, and you're gonna, like an artist with a paintbrush, and you get to put your stroke and name on it at some point.
Yeah, it's you really have to just go out and start evaluating the land, getting to know the land, and finding out the various factors of, what road is the best road to pull the entrance road to the clubhouse from, from a traffic standpoint or from a utility standpoint, and then finding out what the owner's desire for the property is. So what kind of golfers does he want? In the case of Norwood Park, they were pretty much a public golf course with annual memberships. But they have their own little golf society. They have their captain of their golf society. So it's they do things in the traditional British way.
In the golf world, the big talk for the last, well, it's probably been longer, but really came to the forefront in the last couple of years with the prodigious distance, in particular that the pros are hitting the ball. And there has been, there's been some serious debate, heated at sometimes, about the ball goes too far, and they're making courses like Marion, for example, obsolete. Even though they had the Open a couple of years ago. From an architectural standpoint, do you have a opinion on that, one way or the other? And that some of these courses, like an Augusta National, only has so much land that they could work with, and if technology keeps taking to the game to further and further, what is going to happen to these classic golf courses?
Well, they it's a tough situation. Really, the horses are out of the barn, and the golf course architect started telling the USGA and the R&A 25 or so years ago that this was going to be a problem. and they really wouldn't listen to us at the time. So it's really kind of funny now that they're talking about rolling back and maybe having a tournament ball. But yeah, we've had to make golf courses not only longer, we've had to make them wider as well. And safety is a big issue in golf course design. We have to be extremely careful about safety, not only for the golfers that are on the golf course, but for other land uses as well. It's um, and it's going to keep on going unless something does happen. I think the USGA has done some things with golf club and golf ball design that slowed it down, but who knows what space age materials that somebody's going to come up with in the future that it might be some kind of material for a golf ball that we don't even know about now that will make the ball go even further. So
I
who
think
knows?
the DeChambeau effect kind of accelerated that, or maybe even threw gasoline on it, in that he was the first one that showed that speed and distance was a skill that could be developed as he went through that transition for that year. And then it seemed like that magnified everything for a while. Although, and as you said, it had been talked about in the golfing world for a number of years that this was progressing. Really when we went from wound balls to multi-piece balls is when I saw the big jump. Because the first year I played professionally touring was 2000, 2001. And that was about right the time the Pro V1 came out. Guys were switching that summer.
Yep.
And then I didn't play. I ran out of money, as most do, and then came back to work, and I went back in 05 and 06. And the first thing I noticed was the game management had changed completely. The mindset of the players was just hit as far as you can, because the technology had made it easier for you to control shots out of rough. The analytics hadn't kind of taken effect yet. There was not the data. The collection of data was happening, but the data had not been analyzed yet to say if you hit it longer, it doesn't matter if you're in the rough or not, you're going to score lower. I mean, I guess you could say that in some of the old books that were written. I think Physics of Golf touched on that some many years ago. Some other books might have touched on that, but the mindset wasn't known. It was just like, I'm just going to hit this as far as I can, and I can still spin it out of the rough. But as I look at this dynamic, and I obviously don't play anymore, I might try to play some senior things, but are your hands kind of tied on what you're given as far as a canvas to work with the golf course? If somebody comes to you and say, Clyde, we're looking at having a ladies amateur, we're applying to the USGA for that, or we like to have a mid-am or potentially an open at some point in the future. Can you help us or give us input on what we need to do to our golf course? I mean, how do you work with that outside of, well, you're going to have to stretch it out 800 yards?
Well, first of all, I would be opposed to stretching it out greater than 8,000. I think there are other things that you can do by studying how these good players, how far they actually carry the ball in the air, because this is something that Augusta did. They regraded some of their fairways there so that the golfers their tee shot would hit an upslope rather than a downslope. And so that takes some of the roll off the ball. So I think there are things like that. Different grasses with different textures, with different mowing heights. Jack Nicklaus once told us at one of our golf architect meetings that the only way to really keep the players from going really low was to manage the rough properly. And I felt at the time that he was right. But next thing you know, they changed the club face designs, and you guys can spin it out of the rough. But people still come up with interesting ways to protect or defend par. I think distance. The average golfer has not been helped by this new technology as much as the elite players have. And we have to face the fact too that these elite players, the Rory McIlroys and all these other guys, they are athletes now. They work out, they're strong, they're in shape, they stretch. Their bodies are tuned to swing a golf club. You look back, I bet Arnold Palmer never did a push-up in his day.
No, I think it wasn't in the Army, so maybe once he got out of the Army, that was it. He said,
"Yeah, that was it.
I'm not going to do any more of those." I think he was he did his fair share of 12-ounce curls. I'm sure he might have been a world champion in that. But you're right, push-ups or running or deadlift, squats. There was nobody on tour doing that.
No,
Not back then, especially.
no.
Inspiration for you, or learning. I was always a fan of the classic designers. Dr. Mackenzie being one of probably my favorite. If somebody said, you got to write your list of top 5. Where do you draw some of your inspiration from older architecture, or a certain era, or do you take bits and pieces of each one? How do you go about developing your own philosophy?
Yeah, I grew up, my dad was a golf pro in North Carolina, and so I grew up playing a lot of Donald Ross courses, and so he was probably my first big influence. And I particularly like the way that Donald Ross could fit the golf holes to the land to where they felt natural, they played natural. It was just a more comfortable way that each hole fit the land. He was very good at that. And then later, after seeing some of Tom Fazio's work when I was getting out of college, I thought, well, he's brought a new perspective. He's making golf courses attractive, aesthetically pleasing. Probably a lot of that had to do with trying to sell real estate, but still, we went from, not plain golf course features, but we went to basically pretty pictures for golf holes to be able to take some nice pictures and advertise them that way. And then, of course, in comes Pete Dye, and I tell people all the time he was trained by the devil himself for his approach to it. But Pete was brilliant, especially in terms of strategy for golf holes. He could do. I mean, Harbour Town's a great example. You take the first 2 holes, you got to turn a little fade off the tee shot, and then you got maybe a little draw into the green, and the next hole's just the opposite. So that's the way Pete thought. He was not going to let you take your game where you consistently hit that fade all the way around and make it around one of his golf courses without a little trouble.
Is there, as we watch, the British Open wrapped up yesterday, and Brian Harmon, a Lowcountry guy from Savannah originally, and I think he's still down in Sea Island now. He wins, but and Brian, by average standards, obviously is a very long hitter, but by tour standards, I'd have to look at this. I'm going to guess maybe he's average to just beyond average as far as his distances, but not a big hitter by any means. Not right. Compared to the Rorys and the DeChambeaus, Koepkas, guys that are hitting it, carrying it 300 plus. And the courses that they're playing on are a couple 100 to 200 years old. What can be learned from the courses in the UK or in the British Isles, as you have done work over there, that can be implemented over here, that can be borrowed in the design of courses to help mitigate some of the progression of technology and the way that some of these players are training, where the distances are getting to be very difficult to design a course around?
Well, that's there's a lot of things you can bring back from England, Scotland, Ireland, but I think what Brian Harmon did on those 4 rounds of golf was that he was superb with his course management. He played the spots where he knew he could have a good shot into the greens. He avoided those treacherous bunkers. Like he was great about avoiding them. And so his course management was just perfect as far as I was concerned. But you look at some of the other players that got into some of those revetted bunkers. They had a hard time. Gave them fits. You make one tiny mistake and you're pulling out a triple and maybe a quadruple bogey just by hitting it in one of those things. But I think the long grasses that they have in the further out of play areas is something that we could incorporate here, and that's actually something that helps golf course sustainability in terms of environmental practices too. Helps wildlife. I think that can be a bigger factor, and we are seeing a lot more of the new golf courses that are being now, and not that we're building a lot of new golf courses. I think last year there were only 20 new golf courses that opened in this country, but they're starting to incorporate a lot of those same features in their designs to where, the fairway's mowed tight, the immediate rough is mowed at an inch and a half, and then there's a next level rough that's mowed at 3 or 4 inches, and then you get in some really tall stuff that you don't want to be in at any point in time. But I think a lot of that could help golf be more sustainable, and it can and help protect par from these guys who really like to just swing hard at it and hit it as far as they can, get into some bad spots, and then they've got a tougher shot to get back to playable surfaces. So,
is that along the lines of keeping more natural areas within the development of the course?
Yeah,
okay.
It is, and it's also saving water, not using as much fertilizer, saving on the inputs that the golf course needs, having less acreage in the primary playing surfaces that get the most attention. Golfers still want good greens. They want nice tees and fairways that have some nice grass on them, but they're not too worried about what happens 30 yards to the right of the fairway. I mean, they might hit one over there, but that's it's just, I think it helps the golf course from a sustainability standpoint and from an aesthetic standpoint.
If you have a course that has, let's say, or when you get together with either a developer or a landowner and they want to design a golf course, are future budgetary concerns items that you bring up to them, because that's going to help you on how much area you're going to leave natural versus how much area you're going to leave is requiring maintenance?
Yeah, it is. Although I don't establish the maintenance budget myself, we try to get a golf course superintendent involved early in the process to help us through that and determine, what is it going to cost to maintain this golf course. I mean, um, most of my golf courses aren't going to be playing PGA Tour events. I mean, I've had a course play an LPGA event, and my sister was playing on the LPGA Tour at that point in time, and she helped me through a lot of things that they look at. But it's really important to figure out what kind of inputs that golf course is going to be. Do we really need 35 acres of mowed fairway when 25 will do? And that's a cost. You mow the fairways 5 times a week versus roughs you mow once or twice a week, and so that's manpower. And manpower is about 55 to 60% of a golf course maintenance budget. So if you can keep the manpower down, then you can help keep the cost down.
You had mentioned that your dad was a head golf professional. When you were growing up, did you have sights on becoming a professional, or did you always want to be a golf course architect?
Well, this gets into a semi-long story that I'll tell you.
Stories are great for podcasts.
Yeah. My dad grew up in the little town of Wake Forest, North Carolina. And at that point in time, Wake Forest College, not yet a university, was in the little town of Wake Forest. And my dad was taught golf by his grandfather, and he played on the golf team when he was at college, and then he went into the service of World War II. And when he came back, he finished his schooling, and the athletic director wanted to improve the golf team. They had just been using local boys prior to that time. So he hired my dad as the golf coach and the assistant athletic director, and gave him a golf scholarship that he could offer to somebody. So my dad immediately started paying attention to high school matches and whatnot. And I'll make this a little shorter than normal, but he went after a young guy by the name of Buddy Worsham from Cabin John, Maryland, or someplace, I think. And anyway, Buddy basically told my dad that he might could accept that scholarship offer. And so my dad went to the athletic director, who was Jim Weaver at the time, and they got Buddy on the phone, and they offered him a full scholarship to come to Wake Forest. And Buddy told him, I'll take you up on that offer on one condition. And they said, what's that? And Buddy says, I want you to give my friend a scholarship too. His friend turned out to be Arnold Palmer. So my dad ended up being Arnold Palmer's golf coach at Wake Forest 1947 until he had to go back in service for the Korean War in 1951. And so Worsham and Palmer lived in my grandmother's house with my dad, his brother, and two sisters the first year they were at Wake Forest. And I've got scorecards, and I had a trophy that was Palmer's from Wake Forest that I donated to the Wake Forest College birthplace a couple of years ago. But my dad, when he got finished with the Korean War, he decided to become a golf pro, and he also started dabbling in golf course design. And while I was a little kid, he designed and built a course called Wolf Creek up in Reedsville, North Carolina, that I got to watch as a little 5-year-old be constructed. And then later, when we moved to High Point, he designed and was building a course that we owned a share of near High Point. And he had a drafting table in the basement, and I would go down and watch him while he was laying out golf courses. He laid out probably a dozen courses over his time, but he would do that for people for free. And so he taught me all about how to read topography and some design strategy with strategic heroic type par 4s and 5s, for example. And I was playing golf. I played golf from the time that I could walk, basically. So I loved the game. I was a pretty good player, but I don't think I would have ever been good enough to be a touring pro. But anyway, we were down in the basement one night. He was working on a project. I was 13 years old, and for no reason, he looked up at me, and he tapped the plan on the desk, and he says, "You know, you can make a living designing golf courses." And the light bulb went on for me. And I said, "Okay, how do you do that?" And my dad was a pro at a municipal course, and to kind of put it in perspective, it was dark when he left in the morning. It was dark when he came home at night. And so I knew that I didn't think I wanted to work 7 days a week like that. That was my idea of what a golf pro did. I mean, it's great business, but when he said you can make a living designing golf courses, I'm thinking, wow, that could be a lot of fun. So he contacted Willard Byrd, Gene Ham, and George Cobb, and they all told him, have your son go to college and get a degree in landscape architecture, and as soon as he gets his degree, get a job working for an established golf course architect. So that's what I did, and that's how I got into golf course design business. So, end of story.
When you got out of school and you took step one, you listened to that advice. Who did you go to work for?
Initially, I went to work for Willard Byrd and Associates in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Byrd had a reputation for designing both the golf course community, the streets, the roads, the lots, and blending in the golf course design with it. And he would design the golf course too. He worked on the Atlanta Country Club in North Carolina, and a bunch of others. The first course at Seabrook Island was one of Willard's. My dad sort of felt like the future of golf, and this was 1973, that the future of golf was going to be with golf courses in communities. And for a long time, he was right.
That's right.
And Willard Byrd was one of the best at laying out golf course communities. And then part of the time when I was, we ended up going into a recession while I was working for Mr. Byrd, and they ended up going over, and I worked for Ron Kirby and Gary Player's firm on three new golf courses. So I learned a little bit more from them. Then I went back to work for Mr. Byrd, and then in 1980, Mr. Byrd came in on a Friday afternoon and says, "Clyde, I need you to go to Hilton Head Island this weekend and set up a small office for me there, because we just got hired to do a lot of the Hilton Head Company work since Marathon Oil Company bought the Hilton Head Company from Oxford First." And so Friday night, I found myself on Hilton Head and stayed for 2 weeks, went back to Atlanta, got all my stuff, and came back, and I've been here ever since.
What now this is going to be sheer ignorance on my part, but cause I didn't get here till '92. But what were the courses that you guys had designed and the developments and so on Hilton Head? What was your first project around here in this area?
The first project we worked on was the third 9 at Shipyard. Then Wexford Plantation. Mr. Byrd's firm did the entire land plan, and Mr. Byrd did the golf course design for Wexford. Then we did renovations on the 2 courses at Port Royal, and then we added the 3rd course, which not too long ago um, shut down and sold to the town of Hilton Head. So I got to work on all those, and we got the 1st course at Indigo Run started because Mr. Byrd's firm did the land plan. I worked on the golf course at Indigo Run, which is now the Golden Bear, and then that's when Bobby Ginn put the place into bankruptcy. We were about 2 weeks away from grassing that golf course when they just shut the doors on us. And then later, as you probably know from history, the Melrose Company came in and bought it out of bankruptcy and had Nicholas's company bring it back to life under his Golden Bear logo. So, but since then, I've worked on since I've been living at Hilton Head now for 43 years, I've worked on a lot of the courses around here on my own. I've worked on Fazio and the Jones courses, and the Art Hills course in Palmetto Dunes. Did a little consultation with Long Cove. Of course, Moss Creek, I've been consulting with them since '93. Spanish Wells I've worked on. Did a little consulting work for Palmetto Hall. I don't know. I can't remember all of them.
It adds up over time.
A lot. Yeah, it's a long list now.
Yeah, I had Jason Bale was on last week, and we were talking about how young coaches who get very enthusiastic, and you could substitute coach for architect or trainer or nutritionist or attorney, whatever you want to. This would be a cross section of just human beings in general. But when somebody comes out of school or when they learn from somebody, they're very eager to continue to learn more. And what Jason was describing was he'll have somebody come work for him, and he had a particular one of his staff that had just gotten there from Sea Island that was a very good club fitter, and he wanted to learn more about teaching. And Jason told him, look, you're going to be here for roughly 2 to 3 years, and you're going to get the equivalent of a advanced degree in coaching and teaching. And then he said, then I'm going to ship you, I'm going to be on the phone, I'm going to ship you somewhere else, either to Mark Blackburn or Sean Foley's camp, or, you're going to go somewhere else. But at the end of about 6 to 8 or 9 years or so, you're going to have a very, very wide and diverse eye and coaching ability, because you're going to learn from all these people. And the best part about it is you're not going to be the one totally responsible for the development of a golfer, be them a tour pro or up and coming college player or whoever it is. And that meaning that they're going to be allowed to make mistakes. They're not going to be the decision maker. The director of instruction is, in this case, Jason or Mark Blackburn or Sean Foley. In your career, as you look back, was that something that you unknowingly was able to do when you first went to work for Mr. Byrd, and then you went to work for Gary Player's company, and then you went back to the Byrd? Were you're obviously learning different things from each one, but when you went back to the Byrd company, they had to be very appreciative of some things that you might have brought in that maybe they weren't aware of, or just a different perspective on how to do something that you were able to learn at another chapter in your life.
Yeah, Mr. Byrd's firm, was like I said, they did the whole design of the entire residential community and the golf course. But Mr. Byrd, he didn't learn golf course design from anybody. He was self-taught. He did play golf, but he was basically self-taught in terms of golf course design. Very smart man, but he did not draw very detailed golf course design plans. He basically drew almost the way Donald Ross did. Ross would draw a sketch. He'd show the tees, the fairway, the bunkers, the greens, and then he'd write a bunch of notes out to the side. And then Ross's
napkin design.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was a legal size piece of paper, and each golf hole was drawn to a scale of about 1 inch equals 200 feet. But Ross had at the height of Ross's career, he had about 2,000 people working for it, according to the book Discovering Donald Ross. And so at each one of those projects, Ross had somebody who was his project foreman, and he knew exactly how Ross wanted his bunkers to look or how his greens were to be graded. Well, Mr. Byrd was kind of the similar way. He had 2 different golf course contractors that did 90% of his work, and so he didn't have to draw very detailed plans. But when I went to work for Ron Kirby and Gary Player, they were very much into very detailed golf course design plans with grading and drainage and spot elevations and drawing the golf holes at larger scales, drawing the greens at a much larger scale with a lot more detail. And so I thought to me, that was the right way to do it. And so I took that back to Mr. Byrd's office, and on the various projects that I got to work on, I set about doing grading plans and drawing the golf holes at larger scales with a lot more detail. And after I left Mr. Byrd's employment, that's exactly what I continued to do with my own firm, was to just draw a very detailed set of plans. So, I'm not going to be there 7 days a week during the construction of a project. So if you've got a really good set of plans, then the contractor has got something he can continue to work on until I get back. And then I can get out in the field and I can start waving my hands around and tell them what I like and I don't like and how to change it to get it the way that I want it. So, some other things happened during my career that I probably could have improved my position or my learning. Reese Jones offered me a job to go to work for him up in New Jersey early in his career, and I didn't want to move to New Jersey, so I turned him down. Jack Nicholas, after I started my own firm in 1987, about a year and a half later, Jack Nicholas's firm called up and they wanted me to come to work for them. And I said, hey, I'm sorry, I've got my own firm now. I got 3 people working for me here, so I can't really do that. They called me back a day later and said, look, we'd like to buy your entire firm out and have you and all 3 of your guys come to work for us. And I gave it some thought, but ultimately I decided that I was already off to a good start, and I felt like I could do this job on my own. So when I left in '87, I didn't have any work. By the fall of 1989, I opened 5 brand new golf courses.
Mm.
So we hit the ground running.
Was it just through the relationships you had developed through this area and other areas and your career, or was it timing was right, or a combination of both, or what do you think, looking back, seemed to have sparked that growth that quickly?
I think it was a combination of both, because I knew a lot of people in the industry, and one of the first things I did was to send letters to everybody announcing that I was starting my own firm. And I hit the road and started traveling around, meeting people, and just having known a lot of people in the industry, they started recommending me for work. And so by late 1988, I had those 5 golf courses under contract, and we had them under construction shortly thereafter. And 1989 was a whirlwind year, I can tell you. I put a lot of miles on that Jeep.
That was kind of the boom of golf course development in the country.
It was
all through the 80s and early 90s. Yeah. When you were learning, you landscape architecture was your degree, but while you were learning that and kind of had your own time to, you had already been around golf for some time. Did you study some of the classic designers, the Rosses and the Tillinghast and the Mackenzies, and was it George Cobb? Was he from that era? I'm not as sharp on my golf architecture names outside of playing, but is somewhat of a hobby. And knowing that you wanted to go into that, were you studying those designers and what they did and why they did it? And like an artist might study Van Gogh or somebody else like that, and that you're going to go into that field, and you kind of want to learn as much as you can, or were you focused solely on your work in your studies and kind of left that to, well, I'll get to that when I have more time to focus on that?
Oh no, I was still very actively playing golf, some competitive golf, but not a lot. But I would look at, particularly, like I said earlier, Donald Ross. I could, anytime I saw something that he did that I liked, I would write it down and remember it. And I played a lot of golf courses. That was one of the things I tried to do after I made that decision as an early teenager, that I started looking at as many different golf courses as I could. to kind of see what appealed to me, what I thought was done well, what architects did well, and just make note of it and try to remember it. Um, right after I started my own firm, one of the guys that worked for me, we took off to Scotland and played over there for 10 days and studied the golf courses there and took pictures and brought a lot of that information back. But you can imagine, if you saw my golf book collection, you'll see a lot of golf course design books in there, and that was part of what I was doing during that time too. Was reading books by Ross and Mackenzie and Simpson, and Ross didn't ever really write one, but a lot of people wrote books on golf design that you could find in some obscure places and or find copies of and or borrow them from people, and just absorb as much as I could of that knowledge bank of wisdom.
The golf coaching world has branched off into biomechanics, and you got a lot of, well, tech has dominated the coaching world for quite some time. I'm sure it hasn't in your side of the business with mower heights and as we talked earlier with various hybrids of grass development and things of that nature. But going back to that time, did you branch off into maybe or get off on tangents of the golf course business or even the landscape business? And the where that comes to mind is, and maybe, I guess he was a landscape architect, the famous guy that he did Central Park, and then he did all the gardens and the grounds up at the Biltmore. What was that? That Homestead, yes.
Homestead.
So so yeah, the golf course, you've been around golf your whole life. You're in landscape architecture. Were there any tangents that you jumped off on that said, hey, I really think if I look into this a little more, I can incorporate this into what I'm doing or going to do in the future, that you utilize at some point, or maybe you might still utilize today?
Yeah, the degree in landscape architecture was quite helpful because part of that was how to blend things in with the natural environment, make things fit and feel like it's part of the environment rather than sticking out and being a sore thumb or being unattractive. So part of that training in that curriculum was aesthetics, and I think that helped me a lot. A lot of my peers are also landscape architects. A lot of the guys that are designing golf courses now have degrees in landscape architecture. So it was the right career path or education to get into this business, because it taught you that aesthetic training. You got to learn a lot about plant materials. You learned how to draw. You learned how to do nice lettering for when you're hand lettering plans and creating labels and whatnot. I took civil engineering courses. I took surveying courses. I took soil science and horticultural classes in college, just all as a way to prepare for this career in golf course design. So it was all part of the plan.
Yeah, it seems like I always tell some of the young people, the few that come to me for advice, and I'd say, look, it's one thing to stay focused and learn as much as you can based on what's in front of you and within your industry. But very rarely do the next bigger great things come from within the industry itself. It usually comes from somewhere on the periphery that somebody has spent time within the industry. And this goes for anything. It could go for medicine or golf course architecture, coaching, law, I'm sure, something of that effect. But it's some of the people who have spent time within the nucleus, but they see something or that might spur some interest on something that they could have seen while they were having a cup of coffee at a local coffee shop, or something dawns in their head, or they read an article and say, wait a minute, something is connecting here, and I'm going to go pursue it a little bit. And they pull something from completely outside of their field, and then they bring it in there, and they just change. Sometimes it changes the entire paradigm. I mean, as far as coaching is concerned, you have TrackMan, Flight Scope. Those things completely changed how coaching was done. But with the landscape architecture, yes, it is somewhat associated with golf course architecture because it's all landscaping. But to pull in, as you said, going off and studying different soils and grasses, and that it would have to and only enhance what you're doing. So I tell young people that I say, don't just stick to what you're doing. Yes, you need to learn it. You need to learn the fundamentals and the common denominators and all those things that are in your part of the business, but don't be afraid to go outside of that, because you might find something that you can pull into it that's going to enhance it for you and anyone that you're working for.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I think one of the things that has helped me in my career, well, two things. One is I joined the American Society of Golf Course Architects when I had enough
Mm-hmm.
body of work of my own that qualified me, because I think at that point in time you had to have 5 new golf courses within the last 5 years that you designed. But getting to know the different golf course architects from around the country, North America, has really helped me open my eyes to, because we would sit around and we'd talk about different things. We'd have our meetings in different places around the country, and we'd play different golf courses, and we'd play with different architects, and we would see stuff, and we'd start talking about it, and seeing how we could, if we felt like it was a good idea, how we could incorporate that into what we were doing. The other thing that has helped me in recent years is in 2009, I was asked to uh, come out to the Professional Golfers Career College and teach a class in golf course design. And that actually made me go back to my roots in golf course design, because I basically had to create the course
Mm-hmm.
and go through 14 weeks of instruction of teaching them about how golf course architects think and how we strategize and how we use different features to create part of the puzzle for players to solve as they play each golf hole. And that really got me back to thinking, and I started pulling out some of the old golf course design books and looking for things like Alistair Mackenzie. He had in his book Golf Architecture, he had the 13 essential things for an ideal golf course, and he had those things that he felt like were just absolutely necessary to have a good golf course, and and just get back to the basics with a lot of that. So
What
that's
were a
been helpful
couple of
too.
those things?
Well, his very first one in that was that an 18-hole golf course should have 2 loops of 9 holes each. That was in that, and that's very helpful in terms of uh, today's operation standpoint, being able to double tee if you need to, or at least have golfers come back by the clubhouse after 9 holes before they can get to the 10th tee in case they wouldn't want to get a drink or need a new glove or some wild balls or a restroom or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So that was very important. The other thing about having 2 nines was that you could route 1 9 in kind of a clockwise rotation and the other 9 at a counterclockwise rotation, and that kind of helped balance out the dogleg left and dogleg right holes. At least it helped. But he had some other things like trying to keep the distance from the green to the next tee a reasonable distance, but far enough away that if somebody comes out with Pro V1s, that you can lengthen those golf holes and keep the golf course still relevant in today's terms. So, several other things like that. But that's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed teaching that class.
Yeah, it's amazing that as you progress in a career, that you don't realize how far you've actually gotten until you have to stop and look back and maybe work with somebody who's at that beginner level. I can remember when my playing career, touring wise, was officially, well, I didn't realize it maybe at the time, but it was officially over. And I had gotten back into teaching and coaching, and I remember working with a lady, and about 2 lessons, a large portion of the lesson was focused on hitting high pitch shots, particularly, let's say 20, 30 yards. And then, we progressed to over bunkers, and we spent a fair amount of time on that, and she got very good at it. And I can't remember what hole we went out to out at Old South, and she had this shot, and she was deathly afraid. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you just hit this shot for 2 days. I don't understand the problem. And it dawned on me, it's like, well, she's more or less a beginner. And I was coming off of playing where it's just like once you do it, and it had the mindset was completely different. I'm like, she hasn't developed that yet, so maybe take a step back, and so that was an eye-opening thing for me. And as far as I had to take a completely different approach and go back to step one and kind of pull back from many years prior when I was not getting into it, but wanted to go play, made the decision that I wanted to pursue playing as a career. And then the things that I didn't know, you're going to a whole new level. And now it's a whole new learning process at that point, and say, hey, she's at her point in her learning process. You're at yours. You can't wonder why she can't grasp this in just a couple of days.
Yeah, you people that teach people how to play golf, you've got to remember that golf is a very intimidating game for most of us. And it might come naturally to you, but hitting a high pitch over a bunker is not what I want to look at every day.
With as we touched on technology in today's world with the analytics and the metrics, and they have a very good understanding, and it's coming into how to manage somebody around a golf course. And some of those things are, Scott Fawcett, who's been on the show with the Decade System, and Lou Stagner, and he's their analyst for Arcos. In talking to some of these guys, I think they said the standard deviation for a driver miss, even at the tour level, is about 60 yards. So split the center of the fairway, on average, they're going to miss throughout the course of a year, roughly 30 yards each side at their long, 300 yards, which is about 10% of your target line on a missed shot. And Scott has gone so far as to say that some holes that might pinch into a fairway that's only 25 or 30 yards, it's a poor design. Now, I think sometimes Scott goes a little far in his assessment of what is a good design and what's a poor design, and maybe steps out of his range of being a very good player and an analytical or developer of an analytical program. But do you take those things into account now that the metrics are out there as you work with golf courses, be it on a redesign or you're working with somebody on the build of a golf course, and where you place certain things and how you might put where the tee is and what it's facing, or do you do it to where you're like, okay, visually we can set it up this way, even though the hole's supposed to play this way, we can kind of play with the golfer's mind a little bit. I know that's a lot packaged into one question, so I'll shut up and let you just answer, and it goes where it goes.
Yeah. The one thing Scott needs to realize is that we pinch fairways for a couple of different reasons, and one is that we don't always want you hitting a club that you're comfortable with at a known distance. And so we might pinch it earlier, pinch it later, force you to lay further back in the fairway than what you normally would like to, just by placement of bunkers or widening or pinching the fairway. We play games with golfers like that, and that's part of the fun aspect for us. But yeah, I've been reading Mark Brody's book, Every Shot Counts, lately, and he's done a lot of looking into that too with his. I can't remember the name of his system yet, but I've studied a lot of the stuff he's done, and yeah, using the data that he's come up with about average players and good players, we can kind of predict too how we need to lay out a golf hole to make it work for, if it's going to be a public golf facility, how it's going to be play a little bit easier for average players than. And then it might be a little too easy for the really good players, but we're not designing for them. We're designing for the people that are paying the bills, paying the green fee. And we want them to enjoy the golf course. I mean, yeah, we're going to throw some difficult shots in front of them that's going to make or break their round. But by and large, we want them to have a good time too. We don't want them. I don't want them losing a dozen balls out there. I want them to lose one or two. Okay, but I want them to have a good time. And after they get through with their round, I want them to look back and say, I enjoyed that golf course. That was fun. I'm going to come back here. Yeah, that's the way I design those style too. So
I think you need to have shots on a golf course where somebody has to step up and make a good solid swing. And we saw that this week, to reference the British Open again, where I can't remember what hole it was, but there was out of bounds all down the right side. It's like, well, you've got I don't know how many miles left of it, so it shouldn't be that big of an issue if you use a system like Scott's. Okay, I'm just going to aim over here, and my worst miss is still going to be in bounds. But um, as you said, that I try to explain to a lot of novice golfers, or even some that are decent and haven't grasped it yet. It's like, architects are going to play with your mind visually, similar to a magician in some ways, and that these bunkers, the way you look at them from the tee, they might look like they're closer than they are, and that's going to get you to tense up just a little bit. But once you get out there, you're like, oh, I didn't realize there was this much fairway between these two. It's like, yeah, that's the kind of the Jedi mind trick that's being played on you. Or maybe a tee is angled just slightly towards the trouble a little bit more, and they're so prone to want to line up where the tee mark is facing. It's like, well, I always hit it in the water in this hole. It's like, okay, did you realize that the tee is aimed maybe a few degrees that direction? Have you ever considered that?
Yeah. Well, that's actually lecture number 9 at the Golfers College, called Illusions in Wind. And I teach the students how designers can do different things to kind of create visual illusions on the golf course to make distances appear different than they actually are. I don't do it a lot, but I do it on every golf course that I design. But yeah, it's we're doing different things to try to make it challenging but yet fair. One
Mm-hmm.
of the other things I do with the students is I give them about 5 different swing speeds, and I say, I want to know how far each of these swing speeds hits every club in the bag. And they have to go and they have to research it. And then I talk to them about, okay, when I design a golf course, the first thing I want to put on the ground is the green. And I work backwards from the green to the fairway to the tees. And then after I have it laid out, I want to pretend like I'm that player, like I'm that person playing the very forward tee, hitting it 100 to 120 yards with my tee shot, and not being able to get to a par 4 in 2 shots. But here's where that person probably is going to hit the ball, and how they might play that second shot. And I'll do that with multiple players from different tees to kind of figure out, when I put a bunker or a bunker complex on a golf hole, who's going to impact? It's not going to impact everybody that plays that golf hole. It's only going to impact some of them. Who do I
Mm-hmm.
want it to impact the most? Usually the better player, and most often not the slow swing speed player. I want them to be able to get the ball around, because they, as you know, slower swing speed, they don't hit the ball very high either. So,
That's
and they
right.
get less roll. So we're trying to take that into consideration when we're laying out different holes.
As you mentioned greens and designing a course from the green complex backwards, has your philosophy or your design concept changed as green speeds have gotten, and the grasses, go back to the very beginning of when we got to talking, have altered to where they're more easily maintained at a faster speed? Have you had to modify the way that you design greens, as far as, if I'm not mistaken, that the USGA spec, that they do not like anything more than a 4% grade on a putting green, or else it can become unplayable pretty quickly, especially if you have a tournament or an outing or something, and it just makes it almost impossible to stop on a downslope unless the greens are rolling at about 7 or 8. So as your contouring and your design of greens and slopes and ledges and things like that, has that changed over time, given how technology has changed in
It
agronomy?
sure, yeah, it sure has. I mean, back when I first got in the business, we were here in the South. We were still using tip dwarf Bermuda, which is what Old South still has. Um, and we could put some more slope on the green surfaces. But when the ultra dwarfs came out with Champion and Tiff Eagle and Mini Verde, et cetera, we had to soften those slopes. So I look at pinnable. One of the things I look at on the green design is the amount of area that's pinnable. And in that pinnable area, I'm looking at a no more than a 3% slope. But even 3% slope, when the greens are mowed on a regular basis, that can still get pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to have a combination of slope toward the hole and a crossways that adds up more than 4% total. That's what I'm looking at. So it might be 1% cross slope with 3%, down slope to equal that 4%. So I'm trying to keep it in that range. But chances are these grass people, they're probably going to come out with some grass in the future that we can mow even lower, and it's going to make the green speeds even faster. But, I think, average, most golf courses for average type facilities, they're probably going to try to keep it in the calm range of somewhere around 10 on the stent meter, 10 feet. That's reasonable.
What I had found interesting, I had never known this. Well, a lot of things I don't know about the architectural side, which is one of the reasons I asked you to come on. We talk about it, but I had worked and had been around. My brother worked at two Fazio courses, at least in this area. I worked at Kalawasi a very long time ago as a first assistant there. And then my brother worked at Belfair before, I believe, after he went to Old South. And the one thing that I recall from Kalawasi is when they went to redesign the driving range, because the bunker you had the driving range, and right immediately on the right side of it was the putting green, but immediately next to that was the bunker, the practice bunker. And anyone thinned a shot just a little bit, then they were going to have the likelihood of hurting somebody. And when they went to do the redesign of that, they had to call in Fazio's people because he was the course architect. And then to fast forward to Belfair, when on the 16th hole of the East, when that got hit by lightning, the Fazio people did not want it replaced. So I guess I'm asking, how much influence do you have as an architect in general when you do a course on what's going to happen later on?
Well, some of my courses have kept me involved after the fact, and others, unfortunately, they may have run into some financial difficulties or whatnot, and they change ownership hands. I don't always try to get back in touch with the new owners and say, hey, here I am, I'm still here. If you have anything, if you need any help, I'm here. But I have several projects that I've continued to consult with. Of course, obviously, Old South, I'm here locally, so I play there a lot. So, yeah, I stay in close contact with them, and Moss Creek and Jacksonville Golf and Country Club down in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm about ready to do my second renovation on one of my original designs down there. And I'm going back to Pine Lakes at Jekyll Island here next year to do a second renovation of that course. So I always like to stay involved if at all possible, but that's not always doable.
Why would, like, I can understand it. It's somebody at the Fazio level where he's flying all over the world and doing courses. But if using the 16th hole at the Belfair East, for example, that was the par 5, or is the par 5, and there was a giant oak tree in the middle of the fairway and I thought it was a great design of a hole to where if you went to the right side, the fairway was roughly, and I'm just going to guesstimate, maybe 20 yards wide from the edge of the tree to the marsh. If you went to the left of the tree, it was 30 yards plus. But if you took the conservative route and went left, the green was guarded completely by a giant bunker on the left side. And if you took the gamble off the tee, you had a shot up the gut of the very narrow but long green.
Yep.
And so that oak tree, in very similar fashion to the 10th hole at Old South, was a key feature of that hole. And but when that tree got hit by lightning and got knocked out, that they would not let them replace it. Now, I would have to say, if on a design that would play a key feature as the tree that fronts the 10th green at Old South, anything happened to that, I would say if anything happened, that you would say, oh, by all means, please, guys, put something there, because it's just a naked hole without it. It kind of ruins the character.
Yeah, that's a great example too, because 10, you have to, when you stand on the tee, you have to look to see where the pin is on that green, and then you have to play to the proper side or play back far enough or whatever. Without that tree, that's a pretty plain, easy par 4, and it would change that hole dramatically. And yes, I would want them to put back a substantially sized tree, as big a tree as they could get, if possible.
Yeah, I've taken plenty of people out there, students or friends come to town, good players, high handicaps, it doesn't matter, and regardless of what club they have in, because obviously that hole is out in the open, so the wind coming from the marsh just a couple holes over plays a big part in the club selection process. And even though it's a higher lofted club, most of them will catch that tree at some point, especially when that pin's on the left side and they start Yosemite salmon where they're all the way back to the golf cart or all the way on their walk to the green. And it again is such an integral part of that hole that just plays game, because once you hit that tree once, I might have hit that tree 3 years ago, and every time I go to hit my second shot into that green now, I try not to let it, but that shot creeps in there a little bit, and maybe I have to back off, or maybe I don't, but it's always in there,
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we kept it. I mean, it's interesting, but if you look back at the aerial photograph of Old South before we built the golf course, that tree was the only tree in an open field that it used to be. I don't know what they grew in that open field, but it was the only tree there other than some over to the sides. So, that was part of our inventory. We figured out how we could make it work with the golf course design, and kept it. And it's been a unique design feature ever since.
Yeah, it's very cool. I've got I'll message you. I was out there earlier this year, one of our winter days where we get that fog coming in when we have a drop in temperature from the water being so warm, and the sun was trying to come through, and it was foggy, and that tree just stood out perfect. I've got to get that picture printed somehow, and I'll send you. I'll message it to you, because as an amateur, I'm not even an amateur photographer. I just happened to be in the right place, right time. Said this. I think that looked pretty cool, and I snapped about 3 photos of it.
Awesome.
For somebody who's out there listening, and they have a idea, whether it's an inkling or maybe the seed, or they have a deep passion that they think they want to get into golf course architecture, what advice would you give them? Or as you got the advice that, go get a landscape degree, and then when you get out, look to work for somebody, what advice would you have to a youngster now?
Well, if they're still in high school, I would still recommend going to get a degree in landscape architecture, but all during that time, they need to get out and know people in the golf industry, not only golf professionals, but superintendents as well. Try to get to the more famous courses so that they're familiar with what the old dead guys did, and be able to talk intelligently about it, and do other things. But, stay involved in golf and every part of golf that you can, even to the point of being in contact with golf course contractors and golf course architects through their associations, such as the American Society of Golf Course Architects and the Golf Course Builders Association of America, because they have some really good information that can help young people. If a person is already in college or out of college and changing paths and going back for a degree in landscape architecture, I would say that probably their next best step would be probably to try to get a job working for a golf course construction company, and then ultimately becoming a project manager, and then hopefully working with architects to where they could then ultimately be hired by an architect as their on-site construction person.
Mm-hmm.
We've got several guys who did that. We've got several guys who were golf course superintendents. Other guys work golf course construction. Most of them are landscape architects because they train for it. But you don't. There are probably several different paths to get into the business, but it is a very small industry. We have about 180 members of the American Society of Golf Course Architects. There were about 40 when I got in 1985, so the industry's grown a lot through the boom times. But still, there are other ways. And of course, being a good player is obviously a way. That's basically how Pete Dye got involved in the business. He and his wife Alice were both excellent players, amateur players, and they just said, "Hey, we're going to hang up our shingle and go design golf courses." And next thing you know, he's designed Harbortown and he's famous. So,
the one thing that I will say to that for the young kids out there, and I say kids because I'm 50 now, I'll be over that this year, but for anyone younger that you might be nervous of reaching out to somebody like Clyde or a Ben Crenshaw, or I mean, obviously Jack Nicklaus is who he is in the name. But of course, design company is, if you're young and you're reaching out to someone like you, you'd be very surprised at how many people of that level actually get back. Because, as you said earlier, you appreciate the youth and someone at that early level reaching out and saying, hey, I'm interested in what you do. I'd like to learn more. What can I do? Now, that's not always to say that they're going to be able to reach you, because, or Ben Crenshaw or Mr. Core or anybody else, but at least continue to try, and eventually, when your schedule allows, to have a youngster that shows that interest and continues in that perseverance to want to get in that industry, someone's going to get back to them. And I can remember when I was looking at getting into golf as a career, and I reached out to some people and they got back to me. It's like, oh my God, they actually think that I'm worthy enough to get back to. But so it's such a nice feeling, but it propels you to do more. So someone who's done that in my own career, and that was 35 years ago. I was 15 years old, and I reached out to some people and they got back to me. And I guess long and short of what I'm trying to say to some of the young people out there, reach out to people like Clyde and reach out to other people who you might not think are going to respond. And if they don't, maybe they're busy, but reach out to them again, and they're going to give you some very, very good advice, as you have done today.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, Ben Crenshaw and Bill Core. Well, they themselves might not get back to you, but somebody within their firm
Yes.
will most likely get back in touch with you. I know a lot of these architects. We get inquiries all the time from young people, and even people that have already been in their first career. We like to correspond with folks like that, and if we can, we help them. I have a cousin who was on the path to be a golf course superintendent, and he wanted to work construction for a summer just to see what it was like. And I got him a job working digging trenches for Wadsworth Golf Construction Company, and he worked hard. He did well, and next thing I know, he's working for Landscapes Unlimited, and then he spent about 8 years at Augusta National, helping with Landscapes Unlimited, helping them do just whatever Augusta needed. And so he's turned it into a career that's going to help him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and I would have to say that if he decided to leave Landscapes, is it limited or unlimited?
Unlimited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unlimited. That just the scope of work that he was able to be involved in. I mean, you have Augusta National on your resume in any way, shape, or form for anything. It's not like they're just hiring anybody. You're in a very select group, and that moves you probably way up to the head of the line, if not at the very top, and makes you of high value to whoever you're trying to get on with.
Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if he someday doesn't start his own construction firm and go from there, because he's learned from two of the best companies in the business, and he's worked at one of the greatest places in the business. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
So it's a lifetime of work. I mean, you continue to learn something, get better as you go, and you adjust with the times, and you're a shining example of that. I mean, you got into it, you followed the advice that you were given from those who were in the business, and just continue to get better and adapt and learn more from others. And I mean, that's what it's all about, I think, in the end. It's all we can do.
That's right. You have to be persistent. You have to keep working at it. I mean, this is not an easy profession to get into because there's so few people in the business. And quite frankly, we're building so few new golf courses. It's mostly renovation work now, which is still fun. But not everybody's going to make a living in this industry.
No, it's not getting any easier.
No.
But you got a few minutes? We do an emergency 9. This is just kind of 9 random questions.
Sure.
Try to ask it towards the end. The first one and the last one, everyone has gotten it in the God, it's coming up on 4.5 years that I've done the show. So they're the common denominators, but everything else in between is just at random from a long list of questions we've had people submit over the years. So the very first one is, if you were playing in the Ryder Cup and they play the music now to get everybody pumped up, what song would you have them play as you were walking up to the first tee?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I don't know. It would have to be something that had a really strong beat to it, to really get fired up,
Hmm.
get the blood flowing. Um, but I can't really think of the name of one in particular. But I would want it to be, a vibrant song, with
Right.
a lot of bass.
Yep. All right. Um, something that you purchased for under $1,000 that you're really fond of.
My 1999 Ford Ranger truck. Paid $500 for it, and it was the best purchase I've made in a long time because now I can, my kids are all out of the house now, and they left a lot of junk behind, and so I've been taking stuff to Goodwill, and I do my own yard work, and so that truck has really bailed me out of getting stuff out of my yard and to the convenience center. So
Hmm.
that was a good one.
Yeah, I had an old 91 F-150 extended cab, and I bought it 6 or 7 years ago, and I'd always wanted one. It was just a truck that you could throw stuff in the back, you could park
Yeah,
wherever you wanted to, and why so I regret selling it. I had it for a short time, and I wish I would have kept that thing. Yeah, a
yeah,
good pickup truck is something that highly coveted and greatly missed when you get rid of it.
yep.
So hang on to yours. Um, the Mount Rushmore of golf course architects. Who are the four you would have on your Mount Rushmore?
I think Gil Hands is probably at the top of his game right now. Of course, Core and Crenshaw are doing great work, and there's a lot of young new guys that have gotten into business via working with Gil or Tom Doak or Pete Dye, for that matter. That they're taking on a different approach to golf course design. Where my work has been primarily very detailed type plans. These are guys that are getting on the bulldozer and doing some of the actually physical work themselves, and they're starting to turn out some really good stuff. King and Collins, for example, they did one in Tennessee called Sweeten's Cove that I have not seen in person yet, but all the pictures I look at it looks fabulous, and it's
Hmm.
doing very well. So there's a whole new crop of different designers that think differently. That I think is going to be exciting for the future of golf.
So Gill, Hans, Crenshaw, Core. We could put them as one face. We could put half face of one and half the face on the other. Who would be
Yeah.
your other two on that mountain?
Well, to respect those who have gone before us or our elders, I would think Pete Dye would be on there,
Hmm.
Tom Fazio, Robert Trent Jones, in my opinion.
It's a
Because
pretty good group.
Trent Jones really got this country started, really, with the way he did things with his signature design. Um, and of course, he was I don't want to sugarcoat anything. He was basically a factory at turning out golf course designs. Um, and some people criticize that, but he did some mighty good work.
Hmm.
But they turned out a lot. But there again, Donald Ross was a factory too. Ross and Jones both turned out over 400, 500 golf courses each,
That's
but
amazing,
they
isn't
did
it?
it different ways. Yep.
Uh, if Hollywood came to you and said we were to make a movie of your life, and you get to pick the actor that plays you, who are you going to pick?
No brainer, George Clooney.
Good for you. You get a lot of women going to see that one. Even they probably wouldn't even care what it's about.
Yeah.
Um, if you could change one rule in golf, what would it be?
Out of bounds. I sincerely hate out of bounds.
Hmm.
Um, they've changed it a little bit. I don't really know where it even stands right now today, but um, you know, it just it's too bad that we have to have a rule that requires such a harsh penalty as stroke and distance. Um, if it was just a penalty stroke, you take it from where it crossed the line and drop it with a stroke penalty. I think it'd be much better. Uh, I don't know. That's the one rule I dislike the most.
Yeah, it's the most penal one, stroke and
Yep.
distance. Superpower. What would you say your superpower is?
Hmm. Um, Probably being able to get along with a multitude of people with different personalities, and I'm not a type A personality. I'm pretty much an introvert, but I call myself an ambivert, meaning that I can when I need to turn it on and be the star, I can do it. But I'd much rather be an introvert.
Okay. Would you rather have your best round ever or your worst round in a hole-in-one?
Well, I've only had one hole in one, so I sure would like to have another one, but I'd much rather have a best round ever.
Yeah, they're both things you remember forever. But yeah, I've been interested when I came up with that question. Someone said, ask this
Yeah.
question. It's been about 50-50. So it just, there's no right or wrong answer. That's just whatever somebody looks forward to.
I'm turning,
the
excuse
people
me,
who haven't had the people who haven't had a hole-in-one, they always say hole-in-one. The people who've had it usually say
yeah,
best round ever.
yeah, yeah. But I'm turning 72 in September, and back in 2004 and 5, I was still a 2 handicap, and now I'm an 8. And I would love to go back to be somewhere 2, 3, 4. But you just age takes a toll on your golf game, your suppleness, as you know, as a teacher. And if you don't work at it, it's hard to keep up. I was just recently at a Legends of the LPGA event with my sister Kathy, who played on the ladies tour for 21 years. Every morning she's out there, she's stretching, all the proper muscles to keep her game. She's hitting balls every day. She's practicing putting, all the skills, and she's now 55 or 56, and she still has some pretty good rounds of golf.
Good,
So
that's
got to
awesome.
hand it to
her. Just a couple more. Your 1, 2, or 3 favorite books that you tell when someone asks what book would you read or what book would you give somebody on golf? What would it be?
Well, the first one would be Golf Architecture by Ross and Mackenzie, because he had a lot of it isn't about golf course design. Some of it is, but it was written back in 1920, and he was talking about things that weren't quite happening at that point in time. And we talked about it a little earlier about 2 loops of 9 holes each. And people back then were still doing golf courses that played all the way out to number 9 and then turned around and came back. So he was, as far as I'm concerned, he was a little bit of a visionary. But Donald Ross was doing that too. But that's a good book. The books that were written about A.W. Tillinghast, there was a series of about 3 or 4 books that were written about his philosophy, are good ones as well. Mike Hurdson, Dr. Mike Hurdson, who's still around and practicing, he did a book called Golf Course Architecture. That's more of a modern look at golf course design. That's a very good one for being a more modern read on golf course design.
Very cool. So everybody that try to have those links to those books in the summary that people can check those out very easily if they're interested in learning more about that. And then the last question is, as far as Emergency 9, and you've watched both, lived through both eras, the greatest golfer of all time.
Well, for me,
in your opinion,
for me, the best amateur was Bobby Jones, but I think it's been fun to watch Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, then Tiger Woods, because they were all pretty dominant at their time period. And I wish Tiger hadn't gotten hurt, because I think he would have been the GOAT, the greatest of all time, if he hadn't had some injuries and other difficulties in his life choices. Because he certainly made the game exciting, and that's what people want to see. When you go to a golf tournament or you watch it on TV, you want to see those towering drives and those birdie putts and chip ins and all the stuff that makes it exciting.
No kidding. I think we kind of hit on everything, didn't we? Talked about grass and design, old school, new school, technology. What do you have anything coming up? Are you talking anywhere? Are you lecturing on anything? You have anything, videos or book or anything coming out?
No, well, I say that I'm in the process of writing a book, but it's mostly a book for the professional golfers, career college to use after I decide not to teach anymore. Like I said earlier, I pretty much developed the entire class to kind of walk the students through not only the anatomy of a golf course and how designers use different features, but then the entire process of how a designer goes from start to finish. So I'd like to get that finished. I've got 3 renovation projects that one will occur next year at Jekyll Island on Pine Lakes, and then in 2025 we'll be redoing the North Course at Moss Creek, and I'll be doing another renovation on my Jacksonville Golf and Country Club down in Florida. So that's the stuff that's kind of coming up. And the one thing that I hope is coming up in the near future is grandchildren, but I'm not sure about that yet.
That's something you got to be very patient on, I guess. You got to wait.
Yeah. You can't push it, I can tell you. But I got my son has been married now for about 6 or 7 years, and I've got a daughter getting married in September, and one more daughter that hopefully she'll get there too. So
awesome.
when it happens, I'll look forward to teaching those little kids the game of golf.
Where's the easiest way for people to find you? If someone wants to reach out, they're getting some land, they want to hire you, or they just want to reach out and say, Mr. Johnson, I'm thinking of following the same career path. What's the best way for people to reach in? I'll have all your website and everything, the links, social media in the summary.
Website. There's a contact page on my website at www.clydejohnston.com. I got a T in Johnston. Or info at clydejohnston.com. Those are probably the 2 easiest ways, and I answer all email.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. I learned a lot, just things that have been bouncing around in my mind for a very long time on why things are done in architecture and design. And I hope it's helped a lot of people learn some more too, and that maybe take another step, get those books you mentioned, and just next time they're on a golf course, say, hey, I listened to this podcast, and this is why this hole's this way, or this tee box shaped this way. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
I enjoyed it as well.
Hang out for just a minute. But thanks everybody, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks.